Hey YouTubers, today I'm going to show you how to service a 3-fan window fan made by Holmes. This is kind of a pile of crap. It's sold at Walmart and Target for about the $35 to $40 range. And it has the same fucking problem every time. After about 6 months of continuous use, one or more of the motors simply seizes because of poor lubrication. So I'm going to show you how to take it apart and clean and lube the motors so that you can get some more use out of it without having to replace it. The first thing you're going to want to do is remove the perimeter screws all the way around. It's just the number 2 Phillips. And then once we get the cover off, you're going to need to remove the whatever that is, the sealant blocking piece. There's a technical name for it, but I don't remember. So let's get started. So we've taken the screws out, and now we've got the cover loose. And what goes here, camera will focus. Come on, there we go. What goes here, which will pop out when you pull the cover loose, are these little bastards. And their job is to provide a little clicky for the little window sealer that comes out and slides. So don't lose these, you'll be putting those back in place. And then what you need to do is you need to slide the rubber seal off, which is always fun. I'm probably going to have to put the camera down to do this, but let's get the rubber seal off of here. Now we should be able to pull this up. There you go. So there is your fan assembly there. Fantastic high quality. You've got your switch control there. And this is some sort of weird thermostat thing, which I think is pointless on fans since it's not really conditioning the air. And you can see that this is the one that's pretty much tried to freeze up. The motors are so weak, they just don't overcome anything. And the reason why you see rust here is because this serves as a bathroom ventilator and it gets moisture. So the other 2 motors are still okay, but we're going to clean and lube them anyways. But this is the culprit. This is why it's here. So the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to get a pry tool and very carefully with equal pressure pry these retainers up. They don't hold the fan blades on, but they do keep them from coming off, so I will retain them as possible. Once we get those up, then we'll get into how to do the motors. Okay, so now that we got the retainers off, I just simply pulled the fan blades off of the motor shafts. I had to struggle with it a little bit because of moisture that had accumulated on the shaft. You can see there a little bit of rust. Again, your results will vary because this probably isn't as harsh of an environment as it is at my house. And we're going to pause for a moment to clean all the goop and the gunk off the blades and the grills so that this will breathe a little bit better. And you can see there's 2 Phillips per motor to take the cap off and the top bearing, so we're going to remove those and take everything apart. So jumping ahead, now we got the covers off, and you can see there's 2 more Phillips screws per motor to take the top bearings out. We're going to remove those. So we got the screws removed and I popped this loose. And when you take these out of here, be careful because these motors are really poorly made. And you can see the winding housing here spills over up to the stator, especially over here. And we're just going to very carefully pull that out so that it clears. And then you can see all the contaminants here. Clean this off before you pull the top bearing off the shaft, otherwise you might run into an impediment. Let's see if I can get the damn camera to focus here. I fucking hate this. Anyway, you can see the garbage on the shaft. Clean it off, pull the shafts apart, clean off all the garbage. And you can see that the glue is starting to delaminate there that holds that all together. It's a really piss-poor built thing. And there's all sorts of tar and sludge down in that bottom bearing there, so we're going to clean that out and then just use machine oil again, reassemble it. High temperature machine oil, like for a sewing machine or something, should be fine. So we're going to do this with each motor and then start to reassemble. So here's an example of the stator pulled out with the motor shafts. And all I'm doing is I'm just taking some isopropyl and a Q-tip, and I'm just going to very carefully clean the shaft here, both front and back. And then do the same, pull a little bit of fuzz off the Q-tip and clean the inside of this. And definitely clean down there, make sure that's all nice and spotless. And then, considering there's a lot of contaminants on the shaft here, another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sandpaper 2000 grit that shaft to make it nice and smooth and shiny again. And then I use a machine oil. In this case, Liberty synthetic oil is pretty good. Nice high temperature shit. And that should make it last a little bit longer. So that's how you clean up the motors. So I'm going to continue with this and then we'll reassemble. So now I got the motor shaft cleaned up a little bit. Looks a little better. And I'm going to apply oil in two places on the bearing. One is in the oil reserve here. Just put it in there until it stops absorbing it. And then put a little bit inside of the bearing shaft. Likewise, on the motor shaft, put a little bit on top and bottom. And then do the same for the one inside the motor housing. And grab your stator and very carefully, without destroying your windings, push it down in the motor housing. And I have to fidget with it a little bit, make sure it turns freely. Sorry about that. And then put your top bearing back on. I really need to get a tripod. I also need to get my other camera working. The phone camera isn't all that great. And then if I can get a hold of the screws down here. Don't lose those lock washers. Work the screws on. Get the second one up there. Okie dokie. Just going to get our number 2 and put the screws back in there. Tighten them down. Seat them with as little pressure as possible until you get them both seated, then crank them down. And to seat the bearing, I'll usually rotate it in a motion to seat it, and then do a spin check. If it spins freely, that's good. So let's repeat with the third motor, and then put the blades on and test. Now if you run into one of these where you got a bunch of trash on here, and the bearing doesn't want to clear it, like that, don't force it. If you force it, that bearing will pop out of its retainer and it'll never go in right again. So get an X-Acto knife, something really freaking sharp, and what you want to do is you want to scrape off all the junk, rust, whatever that's on there, and get it as smooth as possible, and just keep working it until you can get the bearing off. So let's do that. So I'm going to take this, get the camera to focus if I can. There we go. You just take it at an angle, get all the garbage off of it. And then keep trying until it comes off. Just like that. Now we can clean it up and oil it. So we're going to take our Q-tip, dip it in our alcohol, and we're just going to swab the hell out of it. Make sure it's clean, get all the garbage off. Then, assuming I can find it, I'm going to take some 2000 grit, and we're going to smooth out the surface. Just pinch it between your fingers and rotate the stator. Get it nice and cleaned up. Make sure there's no oxidation or rust or anything on there. Both sides. And we'll clean it off again. And we'll put a couple drops of oil on the shaft, like so. And we'll set this aside. Pull a little bit of fluff off the Q-tip, and then work the bearing. Make sure it's all nice and clean. See that I'm getting a little residual crap off of here. And then we're going to go down into the motor housing bearing and do the same thing to it. And then we're going to take our oil and we're going to fill the reservoir housing again until it stops absorbing it. Put a little bit inside there. Repeat for the motor housing side. Okay. You'll have to excuse my makeshift camera stand there. So now we're going to sink this inside, very carefully working it back in because this shitty plastic housing's warped. Love working with crappy products. Little washer popped off in my hand. Make sure that's seated and it rotates freely. And then we're going to put the top bearing back on. Goes on nice and smooth now. Seat that. Get the 2 screws. And we're going to seat them. Then once both are seated, we can crank it down. Now we've got all 3 motors done. Just do a spin check after seating the bearing. Okay. So now let's put our blades back on. Assuming I can do that. They just press on. Okay, let's do the third one. My idea of a tripod is strapping it to the lamp on my bench, so again, I apologize. They seem to spin quite well now. Let's just do a quick check. Plug them in. Let's see, I believe the center one fires first. Yep. Let's fire the other 2. They're all working. Let's see how quickly they all spin down. Didn't take long before. Yeah, much better now. So now we can reassemble. Now the reason why I removed the blades is because we have to put the cover housings back on. That's the famous anti-moisture, such as it is. Put the 3 covers back on. Get your Phillips screws and just stick them in there. Always like to do a check before I start reassembling things and too heavily. Otherwise you could get halfway through putting them back together and go, whoops, forgot a step, or whoops, something doesn't work right. Two more screws here. Now we can put the blades back on. So now what we're going to do is put the housing back together. So set that on here, but don't tighten it yet. Get everything lined up. You're going to put your rubber trim piece back on. And this is grooved, so with a little bit of effort, you should just be able to slide it back on here. Like that. Now those little clip things. Oop, just dropped one. Alright. They're going to fit in that slot there. And the little bumpy side goes inward so it can interface with the track here. So pause for a moment while I get that set up because it requires 2 hands. Also forgot to mention you want the orientation to be like this, so that it fits down in here like so. Now let's get the other one. Let's fit that one down in there. Make sure the track is seated properly, and then muscle your way into getting it back together. Oh, and I just knocked the clip to the ground again. I'm getting good at this. Like I said, it's really a two-hand job. And once you get it situated on one side, sometimes it's helpful to move the power switch out of the way. There we go. Just gotta futz with it, press it. Now we'll put all the screws back in and test it for a final time. Gather up all your screws. Put it back in. The problem with these fans is that they're just built very cheap. They use these wimpy little motors with almost no lubrication from the factory. First time it failed was only about 4 months out from when I bought it. The high quality machine oil helps, but between the constant use, this is on pretty much 24 hours a day to keep moisture down in the bathroom, so we don't have a ventilator, and the cheaply built motors, they need to be regularly serviced. Okay, so we got that all back together. Let's plug it in one last time. And let's fire it up. And watch it spin down. They pretty much all stop at the same time, which tells me that the lubrication in each one is good, and it's probably as good as it's going to get. So again, this concludes the video for servicing a cheap 3-fan Holmes window fan. This may apply to other brands, as they probably all come from the same Chinese source. So I hope this was helpful to you guys, and hope to have more repair videos coming soon, but just been so busy, haven't had the time to do it. So thanks for watching, and y'all have a great day.